The night in Beijing was unusually still, the wind weaving through narrow alleyways and echoing off the facades of aging apartment blocks. Neon signs flickered faintly, casting a cold, fractured glow on the streets below. Inside one such modest apartment, the shadows clung to the corners, and the faint hum of city life felt distant, almost unreal. This was the place where Yu Menglong had returned after another day under the relentless glare of studio lights. Yet this night was different. It carried an atmosphere that pressed against the chest, heavy with the unsaid and the unresolved. The official statement claimed an alcohol-related accident, but the lingering questions had not dissipated. 4 months had passed, and still the silence around his death was deafening. Fans, journalists, and the online community had tried to piece together the fragments, yet the puzzle remained incomplete. Song Zude, a critic renowned for his unflinching scrutiny, broke through the static of speculation. In his sharp and measured way, he reminded the public that Yu Menglong was not like the others, the stars whose missteps were displayed and dissected publicly. He was one in 10,000, a soul untainted by the shadows that often consumed his peers. While others were embroiled in scandal and greed, Menglong had remained steadfast in his integrity, navigating a system rife with unspoken rules and silent pressures. Yet, even his modest life was marked by struggle. Despite years of recognition, he had lived in the same rented apartment for 12 long years, financially constrained by an agency that withheld payment when he refused to conform. Rumors circulated online, supported by archived photos and videos, revealing his generosity, fundraisers for leukemia patients, participation in the Ice Bucket Challenge to raise awareness for ALS. Each gesture seemed to etch a deeper contrast between the corruption surrounding him and the quiet, almost stubborn morality he maintained. Those who had admired him felt a suffocating sorrow, a need to preserve the memory of someone who had given so much of himself while taking so little. And yet, the peculiarities surrounding his passing deepened. Authorities moved swiftly to suppress discussion, erasing online debates and controlling the narrative. Netizens speculated, argued, and resisted the enforced amnesia. Some renamed their Wi-Fi networks with coded messages. Others displayed his image on public screens, a silent protest against a story they refused to let fade. Letters were written to authorities. Pleas for clarity carried like carrier pigeons across the city, each word a testament to a collective refusal to forget. This was not mere fandom. It was a moral insistence that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, should be acknowledged. Amid the uncertainty, whispers of industry pressure emerged. Hidden rules that coerced compliance, whispered hints that turned refusal into peril, subtle mechanisms that could sideline the incorruptible. Yu Menglong had refused, yet the consequences of defying such a system were not clear. What was certain, however, was that his absence had left a vacuum, an echoing question about what had truly happened and why so many were intent on obscuring it. The night outside seemed to mirror the questions within, restless, searching, and silently watching. If the industry protects its own, what happens to the one who refuses to play along? In the quiet, there was only the hum of neon, the soft shuffle of distant footsteps, and the unmistakable impression that the story had only just begun. If this story resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel so that our future investigations can continue to illuminate the truths that often remain hidden behind the entertainment industry's brightest lights. Share this video across every platform where voices gather, because collective awareness is the only force capable of demanding accountability. Let us stand together, not in anger, but in clarity and compassion, to ensure that what happened to Yu Menglong is never repeated. Let us raise our voices so that silence can no longer swallow the struggles of those who give so much of themselves to the world. Before his name became a symbol, it was simply another entry in the long competitive ledger of the Chinese entertainment industry. A system built on visibility, on influence, on carefully managed images. For every face that rose to prominence, dozens disappeared into obscurity. And within that system, survival rarely depended on talent alone. The industry had long been described by insiders as layered. On the surface, it presented glamour, endorsements, polished interviews, and curated social media feeds. Beneath that surface, however, former actors and production staff had quietly spoken about something else. Unspoken expectations, social obligations disguised as networking, invitations that were difficult to refuse, dinners that were not about food, contracts that carried invisible conditions. It was reported that some artists were pressured to attend late-night gatherings with investors or sponsors. Drinking sessions, described publicly as harmless social functions, were privately characterized by certain individuals as compulsory rituals of loyalty. Wang Zitao once spoke openly during a live broadcast about the expectation to accompany clients for alcohol-heavy entertainment. He stated that he prohibited his own staff from participating in such arrangements. The statement was widely circulated, then gradually faded from headlines. Young Mi, a major figure in the industry, revealed in an interview that early in her career, she received what she described as a clear signal from a director. When she declined, her role was reassigned the following morning. She did not accuse. She did not elaborate. She merely acknowledged that such dynamics existed. In a competitive field where opportunity is currency, refusal can be expensive. Against this backdrop, Yu Menglong's trajectory appeared unusually restrained. His career spanned years. He achieved recognition. Yet, there were no luxury property acquisitions publicized. No reports of extravagant living. Instead, according to accounts circulated online and corroborated by archived rental records, he remained in the same rented apartment in Beijing for 12 consecutive years. In one of the most expensive cities in the country, that detail resonated deeply with observers. There were claims that his agency sidelined him for resisting certain arrangements. Some alleged that payment delays occurred when he refused participation in ambiguous engagements. These claims were never formally litigated. They remained within the realm of discussion, supported by anecdotal accounts and fragments of internal communication shared anonymously. Official representatives did not confirm such allegations. They denied systemic coercion. Yet the narrative persisted among those who believed integrity had consequences. While peers appeared in tabloid controversies, Yu Menglong's public record remained strikingly absent of scandal. In 2014, he voluntarily participated in the Ice Bucket Challenge to raise awareness for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. At the time, many celebrities joined the campaign. For some, it was publicity. For others, it was a gesture aligned with personal values. In his case, fans later revisited the footage and emphasized not the spectacle, but the sincerity. He did not exaggerate. He did not dramatize. He simply complied with the cause and encouraged donations. Photographs resurfaced showing him attending charity events supporting leukemia patients. There were no headlines attached to those appearances. No branded campaigns. The images felt understated, ordinary. That ordinariness became part of the mythos that formed after his death. The narrative of a man who did not exploit suffering for visibility. A man who, according to admirers, gave quietly. Yet the paradox deepened. If he was financially strained, as some suggested, why maintain generosity toward others? Why continue to accept modest living conditions in an industry associated with rapid wealth accumulation? Those questions fueled the perception that he was fundamentally different from the archetype that critics like Song Zude often condemned. Song Zude, known for sharp commentary and relentless criticism, rarely offered praise. His reputation had been built on dismantling public personas. However, in the aftermath of the influencer scandal involving a leaked list of 18 A-list celebrities allegedly linked to tax debts and personal misconduct, Song redirected attention. He described Yu Menglong as 1 in 10,000. The phrase was deliberate. It implied rarity. It implied contrast. More provocatively, Song argued that if certain accusations circulating online were entirely fabricated, legal action would be swift and decisive. Defamation laws in China are not symbolic. They carry consequences. Therefore, he suggested, the absence of aggressive prosecution raised questions. It was not an accusation. It was an inference. an invitation to consider what remains unaddressed. At that moment, the conversation began to shift. It was no longer solely about tax evasion or celebrity gossip. It became about character, about systems, about whether integrity can coexist with entrenched power structures, and whether refusal, in a tightly controlled environment, carries risks that extend beyond professional stagnation. Fans responded not with outrage alone, but with documentation. They compiled timelines of his career. They cross-referenced interview transcripts. They analyzed statements released by his studio following his death. Some identified 14 points they described as inconsistencies or unanswered procedural questions. These ranged from timeline clarifications to communication delays. None constituted direct evidence of wrongdoing, but collectively, they reflected a public unwilling to accept simplicity where complexity seemed plausible. What made this response different was its tone. It was not chaotic. It was methodical. Infographics circulated outlining chronological events. Archived posts were saved before deletion. Digital footprints were mapped. The act of remembering became investigative. In a system where reputation can be constructed overnight and dismantled just as quickly, Yu Menglong's image appeared almost inconveniently clean. That cleanliness, paradoxically, intensified suspicion after his death, because in environments accustomed to compromise, purity can appear anomalous. The industry continued functioning. Productions resumed. Scandals emerged and faded. Yet beneath the routine churn of headlines, something unsettled remained. An unresolved tension between official narrative and public intuition, between the polished announcement of an alcohol-related accident and the stubborn persistence of doubt. And that was when the conversation stopped being about gossip and started becoming about silence. The statement was the rebuff. Authorities concluded that Yu Menglong's death was the result of an alcohol-related accident. No criminal involvement was reported. No extended investigation was announced. The case, according to official communication, was closed. In bureaucratic language, closure often arrives in concise sentences. Cause of death, time of discovery, procedural confirmation. There was no mention of foul play, no suggestion of external pressure, nothing beyond a private tragedy framed as personal misfortune. On paper, the narrative was simple. Yet, simplicity can sometimes generate more questions than complexity. Within hours of the announcement, online discussions surged. Forums filled with speculation. Fans dissected the wording of the statement. They noted the absence of certain details. The timeline between the reported time of death and the public disclosure drew attention. Why, some asked, was there a delay? Others questioned whether toxicology results were fully disclosed. Official documents were not publicly released in full. Summaries replaced comprehensive transparency. These inquiries did not immediately imply conspiracy. They reflected a collective discomfort with ambiguity. However, what followed intensified suspicion. Several online threads analyzing the case began disappearing. Posts were removed. Accounts were temporarily restricted. Keywords associated with his name and specific questions appeared to trigger moderation filters. It was not unusual for sensitive topics to be monitored. Yet the speed of content suppression was notable. When conversation contracts abruptly, silence becomes conspicuous. Screenshots circulated documenting deleted posts. Some users claimed their comments were removed within minutes. Others described receiving automated warnings about spreading unverified information. The phrase itself became controversial. What constitutes unverified information in the absence of publicly accessible verification? Meanwhile, a separate but related controversy had already unsettled public trust. At the start of the year, an influencer had leaked a list of 18 A-list celebrities allegedly linked to substantial tax debts and personal misconduct. Agencies issued denials. The influencer deleted her posts, leaving behind a cryptic message about self-care in the new year. The damage, however, had already occurred. In that climate of exposure and denial, Yu Menglong's death did not exist in isolation. It occurred amid heightened awareness of financial irregularities and reputational fragility within the industry. The juxtaposition was stark. On one side, alleged corruption. On the other, a figure repeatedly described as financially modest and morally consistent. The public began to draw connections, not necessarily causal ones, but contextual ones. If reputations can be dismantled swiftly through scandal, some wondered, can they also be protected through narrative control? Reports emerged alleging that certain images of Yu Menglong circulating online were being altered or flagged. These claims were difficult to independently verify. Some analysts argued that compression artifacts and reposting distortions could explain perceived changes. Others interpreted the situation as evidence of digital manipulation. No official statement addressed these specific allegations. The absence of clarification sustained the debate. Offline, expressions of remembrance began taking unconventional forms. In residential neighborhoods, Wi-Fi networks appeared with names referencing his death. The phrasing varied. Some were explicit. Others were coded. The tactic was subtle but visible. Anyone scanning for available connections could see them. Shopping centers across Guangdong and other provinces, short video clips briefly displayed his image on electronic billboards. The videos were quickly removed. Locations were not publicly disclosed, reportedly to protect businesses from repercussions. Yet footage circulated before being blurred. These actions were not protests in the traditional sense. There were no mass gatherings, no organized marches. Instead, there was persistence, small acts of digital and spatial memory. Letters addressed to local authorities were reportedly submitted by concerned citizens requesting clarification about procedural aspects of the case. Netizens began referring to themselves as carrier pigeons, delivering inquiries repeatedly despite limited response. Whether those letters prompted internal review remains unknown. One widely shared comment encapsulated the prevailing frustration. If photos are banned and animations are banned, are we not even allowed to type? The statement did not accuse. It challenged the boundaries of permissible remembrance. Memory, in this context, became resistance. Yet, an objective analysis must consider alternative explanations. Content moderation in China operates under strict regulatory frameworks. Discussions surrounding death, especially involving public figures, can trigger automatic review to prevent misinformation. It is plausible that suppression was procedural rather than targeted. It is equally plausible that heightened sensitivity contributed to aggressive moderation. The difficulty lies in distinguishing systemic caution from deliberate erasure. Meanwhile, mainstream media coverage gradually diminished. New scandals replaced old headlines. The industry's machinery continued uninterrupted. Award ceremonies proceeded. Streaming platforms released new dramas. Advertising campaigns rotated fresh faces. Public attention, by design or by exhaustion, tends to shift. But in digital archives and private conversations, Yu Menglong's name persisted. Infographics mapping 14 suspicious points continued to circulate. Analysts highlighted inconsistencies they believed warranted clarification. Others urged restraint, warning against transforming grief into conjecture. Between those positions lay a widening fracture. Trust. Trust in official statements. Trust in corporate agencies. Trust in digital platforms. Once strained, trust does not easily regenerate. If the death was truly an accident, then suppression may have inadvertently amplified suspicion. If there were complexities beyond the official narrative, silence would only deepen the divide between authority and audience. In environments and instances where information flows through controlled channels, absence speaks loudly. What is not elaborated becomes as significant as what is stated, because when information disappears, suspicion takes its place. In every competitive industry, there are written rules and unwritten ones. Contracts define compensation. Regulations outline conduct. But beneath formal structures, power often negotiates in subtler language. Within the Chinese entertainment sector, the phrase hidden rules has circulated for years. It is not a legal term. It is a cultural shorthand. It suggests informal expectations attached to opportunity. Expectations rarely documented, yet widely acknowledged. Shortly after Yu Menglong's death, a background actress posted a video that quickly accumulated more than 10 million views. Her tone was calm, almost detached. She did not sensationalize. She did not provide names. She stated simply that the industry contains unfairness invisible to the public. There are pressures. There are hierarchies. There are individuals who exploit ambition. However, she also emphasized a distinction. The problem, she suggested, is not the industry as an abstract entity. It is the people within it. In every field, she argued, there are individuals willing to compromise ethics for advancement. The entertainment world magnifies this dynamic because fame accelerates reward. Her perspective complicated the narrative. If misconduct exists everywhere, then what makes this case different? Why did Yu Menglong's name become entangled with broader moral critique? The answer may lie not in accusation, but in contrast. Yu Menglong was repeatedly described by fans as someone who refused to play along. The phrase is vague. It does not specify the game, yet it implies resistance to conformity. If certain social rituals function as gateways to opportunity, refusal can translate into professional isolation. Industry observers have long noted the imbalance between emerging actors and powerful directors, producers, or investors. Roles can be reassigned quickly. Endorsements can evaporate without explanation. In a competitive ecosystem saturated with talent, replaceability becomes leverage. If even high-profile figures like Yang Mi acknowledged losing roles after declining ambiguous suggestions, what mechanisms operate beneath public awareness for those with less institutional protection? It would be speculative to assert direct causation between Yu Menglong's refusal of hidden expectations and his death. There is no verified evidence establishing such a link. However, public discourse does not operate solely on evidence. It operates on patterns. Fans revisited interviews where he spoke about authenticity. They analyzed moments where he emphasized family, simplicity, and the desire to go home. These statements, once ordinary, acquired retrospective significance. A quote frequently shared online read, "Born as a human, live toward the light." Whether he intended it as philosophy or casual reflection became secondary. It evolved into symbolism. Symbolism can be powerful in the absence of transparency. Meanwhile, Song Zude's earlier remark lingered. 1 in 10,000. The statement functioned not merely as praise, but as indictment. If rarity implies virtue, then abundance implies compromise. The subtext was unmistakable. Yet moral binaries rarely capture institutional complexity. The entertainment industry is not monolithic. It comprises studios, agencies, independent producers, regulators, advertisers, and digital platforms. Within that structure, thousands of individuals navigate ambition and survival daily. To attribute systemic corruption to every participant would be reductive. To deny the existence of exploitative behavior would be naive. The tension between these positions fuels ongoing debate. In the months following his death, online communities constructed detailed death analysis diagrams. They mapped timeline discrepancies. They highlighted what they believed were procedural irregularities. They connected his modest lifestyle to alleged professional sidelining. The diagrams did not present definitive proof. They presented coherence, a narrative structure where resistance meets consequence. Psychologically, humans seek narrative coherence after tragedy. Randomness is difficult to accept. An alcohol-related accident offers closure. A moral struggle offers meaning. The latter, even if unverified, can feel more satisfying than the former. But meaning and truth are not synonymous. Some commentators urged restraint. They warned against transforming grief into martyrdom. They argued that projecting systemic conspiracy onto personal tragedy risks distorting reality. These voices, however, were often overshadowed by emotional moment. The public response extended beyond online analysis. In Chengdu, a resident reportedly displayed a large portrait of Yu Menglong on their front door. In private vehicles, supporters placed stickers bearing his quotes. These gestures were quiet, yet deliberate. They did not demand revolution. They demanded remembrance. Remembrance, in this context, signaled moral alignment. One fan wrote, "Do not worry that persistence will fade. As long as we breathe, that is proof he was here." The statement reframed memory as accountability. Not necessarily legal accountability, but ethical vigilance. The question then becomes broader than one individual. What happens in systems where success is entangled with compliance, where advancement may require silence, where refusal may lead to marginalization? There is no simple answer. It is possible that Yu Menglong's death was exactly what authorities reported, a tragic accident involving alcohol. It is also possible that structural pressures contributed indirectly to circumstances leading to that night. Stress, professional isolation, or financial strain can influence behavior. Such influences do not require conspiracy. They require environment. In evaluating this case, one must distinguish between evidence and inference, between documented fact and collective intuition. The hitting rules narrative resonates because it reflects lived experiences shared by some insiders. Whether those dynamics intersected directly with his final hours remains unproven, but the perception of vulnerability within a powerful system persists. The more they tried to move on, the deeper the memory settled. 4 months is not a long time in the lifespan of an industry. Productions continue, contracts are signed, headlines rotate, scandals erupt and dissolve. In the machinery of entertainment, momentum rarely pauses for reflection. Yet memory does not operate on the same schedule. At the beginning of the year, the public was confronted with allegations involving 18 prominent celebrities and substantial tax debts. The narrative that followed was one of denial, clarification, and reputational recalibration. Careers survived. Statements were issued. The cycle resumed. Against that backdrop, Yu Menglong's absence felt different. There were no exposed financial irregularities attached to his name, no documented scandals, no public moral collapse. Instead, there was a modest apartment, a history of charity work, archived footage of quiet participation in social causes, and then an official statement describing an alcohol-related accident. The contrast created dissonance. In environments accustomed to visible misconduct, the sudden loss of someone widely perceived as restrained and principled can provoke more discomfort than the downfall of those already controversial. It unsettles expectation. It challenges narrative symmetry. Why do some reputations fracture under scrutiny, while others vanish under closure? The response from segments of the public was not explosive. It was persistent. Wi-Fi names, letters, digital archives preserved before deletion, quotes printed on car windows. These were not acts of rebellion. They were acts of refusal to forget. One might argue that memory is the final domain citizens can fully control. It is important to state clearly, there is no verified evidence that contradicts the official determination of an accidental death. There has been no public disclosure of criminal findings. To assert otherwise would exceed documented fact. And yet, the enduring questions remain less about accusation and more about transparency, about trust, about whether institutional communication can satisfy a public that has witnessed previous controversies handled with opacity. When discussions are moderated aggressively, even for procedural reasons, the result can resemble suppression. When explanations are brief, even if accurate, they can feel incomplete. In such climates, suspicion does not require proof. It requires vacuum. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this case is not what happened that night, but what followed. The collective insistence that character matters. That integrity, whether rare or commonplace, should not dissolve without clarity. That a life described as 1 in 10,000 deserves more than a footnote. Systems are complex. Industries evolve. Individuals navigate ambition within constraints. It is possible that Yu Menglong's story is ultimately a tragic accident amplified by public projection. It is also possible that the broader conversation it ignited reflects unresolved tensions within the entertainment world itself. In the end, the central question may not be about guilt or innocence. It may be about accountability to memory. Will the full context of his final hours ever be elaborated beyond official summaries? Or will time, as it often does, layer distraction over doubt until the questions soften? The neon lights outside that Beijing apartment still flicker. The industry still glows. But for many, the silence surrounding his death has become its own presence. Will the truth ever step into the light, or will it remain buried beneath the same silence that followed him home that night?